What if I told you that smoking is a form of self-harm? Now, most smokers wouldn't classify themselves as a self-harmer. However, when you start to see smoking as a form of self-harm, you can see things in a new way, and this can make all of the difference for you. So sometimes when we see something familiar in an unfamiliar way, this can start to shift the way that we think about it. So when most people think the phrase self-harm, they think about somebody who's cutting themselves or otherwise harming their body in a very obvious, visible way. However, when we broaden the definition of self-harm, we start to include anything that causes harm to our body, then smoking absolutely starts to fit into this category. So when you start to see that, you are actually a self-harmer, just not in the way that you're traditionally used to thinking about it, this starts to, impact the way that you're thinking about it because, the way people self-harm traditionally with cutting is, it's almost unconsciously. You, you see, I worked with many people who've, self-harmed in the past, and the way they discuss self-harm is that it's completely unconscious in a sense that they can be doing something like watching TV, they can be sitting down reading a book even, or watching something, and they're starting to cut themselves, and they aren't even they're not focused completely on that activity. They're almost like they're multitasking. They're autonomous. They're unconsciously doing the self-harming behavior. It's very similar to how people smoke. If you were to ask somebody how they smoke, it's not like they're conscious about every single breath, every single time they take a puff. They are just doing it while on their phone or watching something or talking to somebody on the phone or having a chat, while they're, self-harming using cigarettes. Now, again, so the pattern is actually very similar. The unconscious nature of the self-harm, both in the cutting and in the smoking, is very, very similar to each other. So when you realize that smoking is a form of self-harm, right alongside cutting or other forms of self-harm, then you have basically two options. Either you can realize that you're a self-harmer and, it starts to impact the way that you see yourself, or you can realize that you are not in that category of self-harmer, and you can start to change your behavior to make sure that you are, in fact, the healthier, more vibrant version of you that you really want to be. So those are really your two options. So you can, if somebody is, close to you that's harming themselves, what would you say to that person? Like how would you, approach that situation with that person? Would you tell them to continue? I hope not. And if you are a good friend and, you really care about this person, then most likely you would tell them to stop. Stop doing what it is that they're doing to harm themselves, right? Go seek help in order to stop this behavior because you care about them. And in the same way, when, you realize that you are self-harming using smoking cigarettes, what do you need to say to yourself, right? you know so we kind of think about another person first in order to realize what you would say to the other person, and then take that same message and then apply it to yourself, because you are in fact self-harming using cigarettes, and it's time for you to stop. So when you start to tell yourself that this is time, it's time to let this behavior go because you're not a self-harmer, you care too much about yourself, hopefully, then you can start to, take the necessary steps to break out of that cycle. So if this message and this new perspective resonates with you and gives you a sort of mental shock that's needed to help you stop that behavior, that self-harming behavior, then go ahead and hit subscribe, because I'll be releasing content every single day on this channel to help you quit smoking for good.